And I turned the podium mic down, but if she needs it now. It's actually not good.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Leschwitz Recital Hall. At this time, we ask that you please silence your electronic devices and locate the nearest exit in the event of an emergency. Please note that food, drink, and flash photography are not permitted in the hall. Thank you and enjoy the performance.
So, warm welcome to the 2022 Sacher Distinguished Lecture in Music. Both to the audience present in the hall, I'm so pleased to see you here, and to our virtual attendees far and wide. My name is Laura Dolph, and I'm a music historian here at the Cali School. Every year at the Cali School, we welcome a leading thinker whose innovative work engages music as a cultural form. Practitioners of this kind of contextual and creative thinking provide essential connective tissue between the major disciplinary pursuits at our school. Their work inspires young teachers, therapists, performers, and composers, and points to new models of creativity. At its best, this kind of thinking encourages us to step aside of our own artistic practice for a moment, to consider how it belongs and how it can continue. Today we have the great honor of hosting Dr. Doug Geers, a composer who works extensively with technology in composition, performance, and multimedia collaboration, focusing on creative integration of new technologies and multimedia dimensions into concert music, with an emphasis on interactive electroacoustic works. To understand the wildly imaginative trajectory of Geers' art of sound, we might consider his ethereal multimedia theater piece named after the goddess Inanna, or his opera Calling, or Sweep, a work written for laptop orchestra, or his violin concerto called Laugh Perfumes, or his multimedia theatrical concerto named after the ancient epic of Gilgamesh, in addition to numerous other works of acoustic and electroacoustic music. Described by critics as powerfully kaleidoscopic, shimmering, and virtuosic, Geers' music has been performed in over 23 countries by ensembles like Ensemble Fa, Secul Musicae, Ensemble Pi, the Notus Ensemble, the Radio Television Orchestra of Slovenia, the Experimental Studio des Südwestrundfunk, the Center Henri Pousseur, the Princeton University Laptop Orchestra, whose acronym I just love, PLORC, the Verge Ensemble, Choral Chameleon, Sonreal, the Next Ans, Zeitgeist, the Electric Music Collective, and by an impressive and rather long list of extraordinary soloists. He is the winner of fellowships from the Bush Foundation and the McKnight Foundation, commissions from the Argonne Foundation and the Jerome Foundation Composers Commissioning Project, and grants from the Ditzen Fund, the Roth Thompson Foundation, the Hochschule für Musik, Theater Zurich, New York State Council for the Arts, New Music USA, and the American Composers Forum. He is currently Associate Professor in Composition, Director of the Sonic Arts Program, and the Director of the Center for Computer Music at Brooklyn College. I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Geers to our stage. In addition to his considerable professional accomplishments, His deep humanity, humility, and humor has been a personal inspiration to me and the many other beneficiaries of his community building. There are many topics that he could entertain here, but today he's chosen to speak more personally, to think out loud for us about the creative process, and to address the urgent issue of how to move forward and to flourish. Please join me in welcoming him for a presentation entitled Lifting Our Voices, Lifting Ourselves.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you all for attending today. And many thanks also to Professor Dolph for inviting me to speak with you, and to all the music faculty, staff, and administrators here at the Cali School, and especially production manager Phil Clifford, who helped me figure out all the tech for this today, so yay. All right, so today I'm going to speak to you about my ideas and questions about how to build communities as we pursue our musical lives. And I want to do this using my own experiences as examples. But I also want to leave some time at the end to dialogue with you if you're interested and if there's time. Okay, so I'd like to begin by acknowledging the time we are in. Now, in January 2022, we're at the 2-year mark of living through the COVID-19 pandemic. All of us have endured unprecedented stresses during this time. Many of us have suffered personal trauma, and some of us have actually lost people we love. Many of us have also faced and rallied to correct social injustices and economic inequalities that have been starkly exposed during these years. And still, at this moment, the end of the pandemic seems to remain vaguely ahead, on the edge of the horizon, always pushing back a little farther from now. In terms of my own personal life, I'm grateful for the wonderful support of my family and friends that I'm so lucky to have. But I recently suffered my own health crisis, which led me to reevaluate and reprioritize. So there's my lovely wife, Maya, and my daughter, Daria. On the morning of Monday, November 8, 2021, I was on the subway to my job teaching at Brooklyn College, and I suffered a heart attack on the subway. I staggered out, sat on a bench, called 911. I was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, where surgeons sent a probe up from my wrist to my heart, and they inserted a little metal tube called a stent to keep the blood flowing to my heart. And it's there now, I'm here. That heart attack was the most physically painful thing that I've experienced in my life. And as it was happening, you know, I faced the prospect that I might not make it. I'd love to say that all kinds of profound thoughts went through my head when this happened, but in reality, my whole world shrank to the head of a pin size. I thought of Maya and Daria. And likewise, you might think that maybe the Mozart Requiem would come into my head at that moment, or maybe some profound piece by Olivier Messiaen, you know, about transcendental, you know, experiences or whatever. But instead, for reasons I can't quite understand, the Aretha Franklin song, "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," was coming through my head, you know, as I was laying there on the operating table. So. Okay, and I do love that song, so, but still, it was kind of a surprise, like, okay. Anyway, now that I'm recovering from both the global stress of the last 2 years, plus my own personal near-death experience, my orientation toward what I do has shifted. Much of this builds on my previous priorities, but now the stakes feel higher. I feel more than ever that our lives on this planet are interconnected. We're sharing this world. And success should be measured not only by individual achievements, but on a larger community scale. And so I have 3 questions that I'm trying to keep in mind and that I'd like you to consider too. How can we as musicians follow our dreams and simultaneously build a path for our communities? How can we connect with and contribute to the communities that are around us? And as we recover from 2 years of isolation, how can we build back better, as Joe Biden's slogan famously sums it up? I'm not coming to you today with concrete answers. Instead, I want to share my perspective and my experience with you. I hope that through this, we can all consider how to find and possibly redefine success in our musical lives. Okay, so next I'd like to give you a quick thumbnail of my personal story. I was born in a small, crowded house in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up in a large family where I learned to cooperate and collaborate and share. I was lucky enough that my family's church had a really dynamic music director who formed a children's choir and filled our performances with positive energy. I joined the choir, I sang in it for several years. I also started learning guitar. I thought I might become a rock star. It was only about 2 years into the guitar studies that I realized, oh, I'm studying classical guitar. Eddie Van Halen doesn't play classical guitar, but it was too late. All right, so meanwhile, my dad was fascinated with technology. He bought us an Atari computer when I was small, and because he had heard about programming from some of his work colleagues, he bought not only video games and a word processing app, but also programming languages. And he said, if you want any more games on this thing, you have to do it yourself. And so I tried. Then many years later in college, when I took my first electronic music class, I remember going into that studio and seeing the computer, the tape machines, the microphones, and the instruments like all in a single room. And I just thought, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. This is my thing. And I took out a student loan and bought my own equipment to get started and spent a lot of time in that room over the next couple of years. So now I'm a composer who uses technology in every piece I write, whether it's an acoustic piece or electronic. I like to build software and hardware instruments to help me write the music itself and to perform the music. And for years I've been fascinated with multimedia situations and pieces. In terms of my own style and techniques, I'm interested in timbre and its development. I'm interested in using processes and algorithms. I'm interested in combining electroacoustic sounds with traditional instruments. And I'm interested in exploring possible performance venues outside of the concert hall. And part of that probably is a wish to find audiences and different audiences and connect with people. Because there are certain people who just won't put on a tie and go to David Geffen Hall, but they might go to an art gallery, and things like that. Okay. But writing music also involves bringing that music into the world. And this is where I see multiple and intersecting communities of people whom I want to join, whose points of view I want to know and consider. Individual performers, the teams who present concerts, conductors, producers, composers, multimedia teams when I'm in the multimedia art world, and the communities which are comprised of these creative people and their audiences. In other words, I think it's really good to think of the creators and the audience being one community rather than two people who are divided by this proscenium edge. So I believe as much as possible it's valuable for me to be a part of a community of music lovers. They may join my audience, I might join theirs, and then having a performance as a community event, a gathering, rather than an event where I expect all the focus to be on me and for people to just kind of appear out of nowhere and file in the door. As an example of how I'd applied this kind of community-oriented approach in my work, I'm going to walk you through one example. And this is a choral piece I wrote in 2018, which is called As Adam, Early in the Morning. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the community considerations that shaped the piece, as well as some of the more musically specific details that resulted. And then I'll play the piece, which is about 6 minutes long. Okay. In late 2017, I was commissioned to write a piece for the Dessau Choirs, which is an amazing amateur choir in New York City. I had worked with them previously when they performed an earlier work of mine. So they sort of knew who I was. And I just want to sort of pause here for a moment to applaud the Dessau's musical director, Malcolm J. Merriweather. Malcolm is a fabulous baritone and conductor. He's an inspirational person. He's also on the faculty at Brooklyn College where I teach, which is how I met him originally. So Malcolm and Dessau had decided to suffuse their 2018-19 season with a celebration of the poet Walt Whitman in celebration of the 100th year anniversary of his birth. And as part of the season, they commissioned a few composers to write new pieces based on Whitman texts, including me. And for me, this was a great opportunity to bring a new piece into the world. It was a chance to express myself creatively. It was a chance to bring people together, the choir, their friends, their families, their fans, proponents of LGBTQ rights, because Whitman was a gay man, the people who enjoyed Walt Whitman's poetry, so more literary-oriented people, appeared and came to the concerts, and fans of choral music who may not have heard Dessau before, but were intrigued by the program. So before writing a note of music, I stopped to consider who was I writing for and why. I considered what I knew and had heard performed by Dessau, what kind of piece they were requesting, and what else would be on the program at the premiere. So these considerations were all made to help the new work be a success for everyone involved, for me, for the choir, and hopefully the audience. Although the piece would have my name on it, my hope was for it to be kind of custom built to connect all these people and serve the goals of bringing them all together in that situation. And this approach springs from my belief that a composer should work with performers kind of like a fashion designer making a custom suit or a custom gown for somebody. The piece should fit the recipient perfectly, should cast them in their best light, but also be distinctive with the composer's sort of stylistic thumbprint on it. So if you were a fashion designer, a suit for Lin-Manuel Miranda would probably not be the same suit you would design for Elton John, right? I mean, you need to tailor it to the people while retaining your own identity. So returning to my piece for Dessau, first of all, I needed to choose a Walt Whitman poem to set. And I found over the years that I enjoy more and more working with less and less text in my pieces. I like for the singers to be able to be expressive rather than having them feel like they have to churn out huge amounts of verbiage. And so I chose a poem for the situation that was one of the shortest Walt Whitman poems I could find, which I also loved. Many of his poems are quite long, actually. Yeah. Okay, so eventually I found this poem called As Adam, Early in the Morning, and I'm just going to read it to you here. As Adam, early in the morning, walking forth from the bower, refreshed with sleep, behold me where I pass. Hear my voice. Approach. Touch me. Touch the palm of your hand to my body as I pass. Be not afraid of my body. So to me, this is a fabulous Walt Whitman poem. It's clear and plain spoken. it shows his sort of rustic affinity with nature, and it revels in the physicality of the human body during an era when that was not necessarily the socially acceptable thing to do. So once I chose the poem, I wanted to figure out a way to make this special, to connect it with Whitman musically. So as I mentioned earlier, much of my music explores timbre, sound color. So one of the ways I do this is to base the vertical arrangements of pitches in my works, you could call them harmonies or scales, on the frequencies that I find present in real-world sounds. And this approach is generally called spectral music composition. Maybe a couple of you have heard of that before. And so I decided to base the harmony in my piece on the sound frequencies from Walt Whitman's own voice. Whitman died in 1892 when audio recording had just been invented, basically. But it turns out that when he was an old man, someone recorded Walt Whitman reading part of his poem America onto an Edison wax cylinder. That recording still exists today and is publicly available. So I'm going to play it, and I'll say it sounds a little bit garbly. There's a lot of surface noise, like a sound in it. But I put up the text, and I think, you know, if you see the text and listen at the same time, you'll be able to figure it out. So here we go.
America, center of equal daughter, equal son, all alike and good, grow, ungrow, young or old, strong, ample, fair, enduring, capable, wilt, perennial with the earth, with freedom, law, and love.
Okay, it was cut off there. Maybe they reached the end of the cylinder, I don't know. But if you go to YouTube and Google Whitman audio, you can find it there. And if you Google like record wax cylinder, you can see videos of people actually recording themselves on wax cylinders. It's pretty fun. Okay, so I downloaded this audio and I filtered it a little bit to try to get out some of the noises, the surface noise, and I opened it up in some software. So here we see the loudness of his voice vertically and time going left to right. Probably a lot of you have seen audio software where sound waveforms are represented this way. It's representing it in stereo, but actually it's mono. There was no stereo in 1892. That's the software, whoever encoded the MP3 or whatever. Then I opened it in another piece of software where I could see frequencies. Here, frequencies are vertical, time is from left to right, and the darkness of those bars indicates the loudness. So the darker they are, the louder they are. So here, it's not maybe so easy to see from your vantage point, but you can see that most of the action is down in the lower range, up to like about, you know, maybe 700 hertz or something. That's the frequency content of his voice, but there are other partials and spectral components up higher as well. So after trying several approaches, like taking the whole text, taking a few different phrases and seeing what I could find inside, I just decided to keep it simple and derive all the harmonies in my piece from Whitman saying the word love.
Love.
And so I analyzed that audio, I extracted the strongest frequencies present, and I divided these into 24 sonorities that I converted to MIDI notes, and I could look at them as musical notation. So here they are. This is going to be a little QuickTime video. It's going to play the 24 chords that I sort of pulled out of the recording of Whitman saying the word love. So one thing you'll notice is that there are different accidentals and different octaves. That's a little tricky with any instrumentalist, but especially singers. It can cause some confusion, you know, in rehearsals, like, is this flat or sharp? Both, that sort of thing. But you know, we can make it work. So now that I had my general sound world set, I started improvising vocal material based on sort of the structure. So basically, wherever I went, I sang into my phone. Walking on the street, between classes, on the subway, just if an idea came into my head, like I sang it into the phone to capture it. And because I love jazz, and I included some scatting vocal stuff in the piece, and because I wanted rhythmic propulsion, I decided to have some kind of beatboxing elements in it as well. Whether or not you would interpret either of those that way without me saying this in advance, I don't know, but that's what my intention was. You'll hear this in a minute, and you can decide. So eventually I exported all of those recordings into audio mixing software. I compared them, I listened to them, I transcribed them. I chose the most interesting ones to use in the piece. And then once I had the harmonic structure and all of the surface level melodic materials, I started really working to set the piece to music. Meanwhile, I created my computer instruments for the piece using a software system called Max MSP. It's a kind of audio Lego for software music systems. It's been around since like the late 1980s. It's venerable software. So my instrument was designed to play the harmonies while the choir would sing, essentially being the accompanist. And I programmed it so that the way that it would play the harmonies changed at different times in the piece to kind of like align to what the choir was doing in those different moments. So there's another view of the innards of the software. There's the chord player. This one is synthesizing sounds, and I thought of it as a kind of homage to two wonderful New York composers that I know, Morton Subotnick and Laurie Spiegel. And they're both still around, they both live in New York City, and both of them in the 1970s used analog synthesizers and sequencers to produce their music, which is kind of a distinctive style, you might have heard it in like Kraftwerk or other pop bands, as well as the more experimental music. Okay, so as the sort of icing on the cake, the computer music also plays the voice of Walt Whitman himself, saying a few words from his poem here and there. It's a bit subtle, you might not even notice it when you listen to the piece, except for maybe in one or two spots, including the beginning. So then I designed or integrated a controller so I could have my hands on my computer instrument during performance to keep it together with the live performance, so that it would that I could really respond on the fly. And here is a shot from rehearsal. This is my modest little rehearsal setup over here. The MIDI fader box, the laptop, audio interface, and we were going just into the church's speakers for the rehearsal, which was not amazing audio quality, but for the concert we had a really nice audio system, so it was lovely. Okay, and here's a photo of a performance of the piece in November 2018 at Riverside Church. And now I'll just play the piece, which, like I said, is about 6 minutes long. Here we go. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. So, as the genesis and the premiere of As Adam demonstrate, as musicians, we're often working as part of numerous intersecting communities. We each contribute our ideas and our talents. By working together, we can accomplish amazing things, grow artistically, and touch the lives of those who come to hear a performance. And although I did go down the rabbit hole a little bit there in terms of how my piece was composed, my main point is that this piece and most musical performances are results of community action. All aspects of performing a concert, are acts of community, created for the community of listeners. Success is helped tremendously by showing respect for every member of that community. From the performer, the star, to the usher, everybody's ideas and perspective are worth consideration and worth listening to and considering. Regarding audiences, it's worthwhile to consider who might be in your community of listeners in any given situation. How can you reach them? How can you bring them music that will impact them and be meaningful to them? The program you perform could be optimized to the audience, rather than considering the audience just to be a passive, receptive crowd. And of course, audience members who have a strong connection to what you do are more likely to come to your next show. But even beyond these connections, our experiences together and with our audience have a tremendous value for our and their psychological, social, and emotional health. In fact, the experiences we create are among the most valuable aspects of a musician's life, a fact that can sometimes get lost in the scramble to achieve and succeed. It's important to keep fulfillment and the bliss we feel from performing in our sight and in our lives. That will sustain us. And as much as you're able to use your music making to bring feelings, fulfillment, or even transcendent moments to yourself and into the lives of others, all the music making you do, all that time in practice rooms, all that time in rehearsals, it's worth it. It's important to realize that the immense value of music in our lives is generally not congruent with how it's economically valued by our wider society. Today, it can be difficult to make a living from one's own music, but that does not make the music itself or the act of music making less valuable. And although we would all love the prestige of a Carnegie Hall recital or a New York Phil gig, we have to be careful not to equate our value with the social status of those achievements. Ambition is great, but tying your self-assessment to goals of status and acclaim can be toxic for musicians. Because people come to feel that unless they have that first chair, or unless they win a competition, that they're inadequate. Or they become filled with jealousy for the people who get those chairs and win those competitions. So, of course, I know that we need to pay the rent, and that honors and gigs at prestigious venues can help you survive economically. That's great. But it's important to remember that the power of music has no relation to economics. As musicians, you have this power in your hands and in your mind. You can bring music to anyone you meet. You can do it to pay the rent. You can aspire to play to adoring crowds, but you can also perform for the love of music itself, for the feeling that you get when you conjure beautiful sounds out of your instrument. Being a musician can be really stressful. But I advise you that amid everything else that happens, keep the joy of music making in your life. Think about how you can connect with others. Bring them moments of emotional experience in music, both in professional and private circumstances. If you can find ways to reach out to others and use your musical ability to help them psychologically, emotionally, or spiritually, you're doing good in this world. You're helping. Clearly, it's awesome to be a virtuoso performer, but it can be just as powerful to make simple music on the couch with your friends or family. We need to think about what will bring us moments of true happiness, and how can we bring those moments to others. Those intimate situations can bring some of the strongest feelings of community and connection. And so in this time when we're still at least partially socially isolated, I want to encourage you to find or even make communities of musicians and music lovers. Sharing music making, even the simplest song, can lighten the load for others tremendously. Think about anyone in your life who you could bolster with a song, with a recording you make, or with a performance you could do for them. It doesn't have to be a Brahms concerto, although it could be. It could be a song they danced to in high school, played on your clarinet, or a hymn they love, played on your trombone. Your music making can be your gift to them, rather than an opportunity for you to show off your gift. So, in short, I'd like you to consider two propositions. Music as soul food. Music can heal us and our audiences. And second, that our creativity is both an expression and a gift we offer to those around us. And James Brown sort of once said that when he went on stage, he tried to remember the poor little boy he once was, and that was where he derived his energy to perform. And I think that's really worth considering, like, where are you coming from? What is your point of origin? What is your story? Who are your people? How can you help people around you with your music? Both of these concepts can help us foster community-oriented attitudes and action. So, finally, these considerations lead me back to the three questions I presented at the start. How can we as musicians follow our dreams, but also build a positive path for our communities? How can we connect with and contribute to the communities around us? And as we recover from 2 years of isolation, how can we rebuild, but also build back better? I'm interested to hear whether any of you have any ideas or comments on what I've outlined, and I'm eager to continue the conversation, whether here or now, online, in person at a future date, ideally adjacent to an inspiring concert. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.
You're the key to my peace of mind.
Time for some questions. If someone would like, I will circulate, Doug, and if you want to just stay there for a minute.
Okay. Or comments or suggestions. I realize now, Laura, that I forgot to dance during my talk.
Exactly.
Sorry, guys, you missed a dance.
I had a request for him to dance, so I don't know. You could show us now.
Nah, it's too late.
Any questions from the house? I have one. I start us off, and maybe you can jump in. There's a lot of things that I'd like to ask you about. One in particular, too, because Doug, you've been writing music for so many years, and I'm sure that many of the people in the house are not as familiar. And I'm just, I have sort of some overarching questions. Particularly about the kinds of stories that you're interested in, because I love that you gravitated towards Gilgamesh, and I'm really interested that you've invested yourselves in the characters of those stories. For example, the Ishtar character and the Gilgamesh character. Apparently, Ishtar makes a proposition to Gilgamesh and it doesn't work out very well, I think. That's the way that story goes. But, anyway, the long story of it is, I'm curious to know what kinds of human stories you're interested in, because you've spoken today about communities of people that create those works that you've put on paper, but there's you have a kind of, I don't know what it would be, kind of a propensity towards types of stories. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Okay. I haven't thought of this before, so, but I feel like what's great is to find a story that has I mean, it maybe sounds like a cliche, but a universal appeal. And one thing that I've always been sort of like obsessed with, I have to admit, is my own mortality, my limited time duration on this planet, and the looming threat that it could end. And again, my heart attack in the fall was like a slam in my face that it's real, you know, it's real. So in Gilgamesh, he's searching for immortality. He goes on a quest to try to live forever. And in the Inanna story from that other piece, she descends into the underworld to try to bring her sister back to life. And my opera is about a family living through 9/11, basically, and coping with the aftermath. And that's another kind of like life or death situation. So I think that's a lot of it. Like, how do people cope when they're at the end of the rope? And what ways do they try to find an escape hatch, you know, and live on? I think that's a big part of it. So definitely those are things that just resonate with me, partially because I'm a little obsessed.
Yeah, well, those ancient stories have struggled with those or grappled with that issue, certainly. So that makes sense now. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, this is like a really random question, but did you think that incorporating such like alien sounds into the soft choir performance kind of reflected how like alien the human body was to people in the 19th century? So like that's why you combined like all the technology with the poem that you chose?
That's a great question, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but I like it. And definitely, I see the electronics in a lot of my pieces as kind of being the invisible magic around you. My wife, Maya, is a violinist, and so we've done several pieces where she plays the violin, and then the software listens to her play and makes crazy, like Jimi Hendrix sounds come out of it. And part of that is the idea that the violin is kind of conjuring this magical force that comes to life and sort of speaks. And in a similar way, with this choir piece, the electronics are kind of like this inner world that is under the words, you know, which is kind of expressing feelings that are not explicitly in the text. And it's given the 19th century Victorian attitudes toward the human body and the sort of dirtiness of who we are. Yeah, like really, it's an interesting perspective. I like it a lot. Thanks.
I was just going to ask, you know, there's so many young composers here, and
there are a lot of young composers here who are listening to this and listening to your music, and it's wonderful, and thinking, how do I get started in something like this? What advice? I know it's a question you probably receive a lot, but what advice do you give to young composers who are, in essence, new to composition, or new to music making, or new to being expressive and trying to learn their instruments, learn their theory, you know, learn all the academic things that we have them learn? How do they kind of like take all that in and still create?
Yeah, I totally sympathize with that. I remember when I started off as a composer, first, you know, I grew up in a household where the only classical music we had were like the Reader's Digest, classical, you know, LPs from like the 1970s or something. And entering this other world and, you know, feeling unsure about where I was. And then suddenly you have all these rules of music theory and you're not sure like how to apply that, you know, or how it relates to everything else you've ever heard or done. And I remember being in a place where I really was kind of frozen because I was afraid to do anything. I thought, it has to be new and groundbreaking, or, there's no point. And that's horrible. That's tremendously, it's detrimental to one's development. And so I feel like it's really important to try to understand I am who I am. And everything I've done and my entire background is valuable. And I'm learning these new things, I'm being exposed to all these new things. And it's almost like being in a giant buffet, There's my show, and there's, Messiaen, and I think I remember when I first got to grad school, I just took as many history classes as I could because I just wanted to have perspective. And I thought, I just want to know what has happened and hear all these sounds to help me sort of digest, all of that stuff and feel like where am I in relation to it. So definitely, I think one has to balance, like, soak up as much as you can. Listen to as much different music as you can, whether it's Korean court music or Beethoven or, Thelonious Monk. Like, there are amazing things out there in many different styles of music. And I feel like part of what brings one his or her own voice is the kind of gumbo that you make out of your influences. So I might take influences from Yanis Xenakis, but then apply them a way that would have horrified him. And that's part of what makes it me, like, oh, if you just add a bit of Björk and a bit of John Coltrane and whatever else, like, there's something that might percolate out of that could be distinctive, So I think that it's really valuable to trust who you are and try to always be stepping forward, try to always be on somewhat unsafe ground, to see if you can explore and expand and grow. Yeah.
I think it's pretty hard to improve on that. Thank you. I want to just thank you so much for coming, for being present today. It's a really, really important message. Does anyone else have any further questions? I don't want to cut you off too soon. No, thank you for your participation. Thank you for being here as well. Everyone stay safe, and let's give one more big round of applause for Doug.
Thanks. Thanks for coming. I'm really impressed to see so many people who actually came out in person. And for those in the Zoom world, thank you also for attending. Thanks, everybody.